Hello there, people of the internet. So, as is not surprising to anyone, I have a lot of people on here, on this channel, on this platform, who are very familiar with firearms, and like me, it is one of their main hobbies, and, you know, guns and gun life is just kind of what we do. But there are a lot of new shooters and people who do not necessarily understand everything about firearms like, may say, you and I do. So I get a lot of new shooters that come in, and a lot of these people never actually went out and bought themselves a firearm, but they inherited a firearm or were gifted a firearm or something like that. 9 times out of 10, like way more often than I ever thought would actually be the case, I get somebody who comes online and they ask me about, you know, rifle A, B, or C that they got from their grandfather who had just passed away. Maybe he was a hunter or military man or, you know, insert occupation here. And, you know, he passed away and the grandson or son or whoever the hell it is that I'm talking to, they got their hands on the rifle that old grandpa used to have, and now they're curious about it and trying to find out more information about it. So, 2 things to start off with. First off, you're going to want to figure out what it is that you actually have. If you look on the rifle somewhere, most of your military surplus rifles are going to have some sort of markings or indicators as to what it actually is. And most of your hunting rifles, especially your modern day hunting rifles that, you know, existed beyond like the 1920s and later, pretty much all of your hunting rifles are going to have some sort of markings on them to designate what rifle they actually are and what caliber it is that they're chambered in. Now, if you get yourself a rifle like this right here is a 9130 Mosin Nagant. You guys have seen this on the channel plenty of times if you're not, you know, new to the channel. If you get yourself a rifle where most of the rifle is covered in wood, odds are it is some sort of military surplus rifle. If only the little, you know, a few inches of the end of the barrel are sticking out of a more or less completely wood-covered rifle, odds are, like I said, it's a military surplus rifle from some country, you know, somewhere. Might be American-made, might not be. The Mosin Nagant is a pretty iconic-looking rifle. You could very easily look up some of the more common military surplus rifles out there and piece together what rifle it is that you actually have, assuming that yours is, in fact, a military surplus rifle. As a matter of fact, I should make a video on the most common military surplus rifles out there. Just, you know, common factors to look for to determine whether or not you have what it is that you're looking for. But the markings on most of your rifles are going to be somewhere in this ballpark right here. We got top receiver, side receiver. That should tell you like most of what it is that you're looking for. If you can't find caliber up here in the front of the barrel somewhere, if it was imported into the country, there's going to be an import stamp somewhere on there, and many times they will have the caliber up there as well. So that will help you indicate what it is that the rifle's actually chambered in. Now, this right here is not a surefire way to determine whether or not a rifle is military surplus or not. You might have yourself a rifle that looks like this. This right here is a sporterized rifle. This right here was a military surplus rifle. This is actually the same rifle that this right here is, a Mosin Nagant, just, you know, a little bit shorter. This is a Type 53, this is a 9130. We're not going to get into those aspects. For all intensive mechanical purposes, this is the same gun as that, but as you can see, the wood stops pretty significantly shorter, with lack of a better term. It stops at a shorter distance, you know, than the long military version rifle does. This right here is because this rifle right here is set up for hunting and sporterization purposes. Now, if your grandfather was, like I said, you know, an avid hunter and whatever, then he probably has a rifle that looks kind of like this. The, sporterized rifles and rifles that have been altered from their original state does make things a little bit more difficult whenever it comes to identifying what it is that they actually are. Whether or not you have a rifle that, you know, was from the ground up a hunting rifle, or an ex-military rifle like this one right here is, having a rifle that is outside of its original configuration does make identifying it a little bit more challenging. Past that point, you start looking at the action of the rifle, how it is that it actually functions. You start looking more at like the mechanical cosmetics behind it. Like, for example, the way the magazine is on the Mosin Nagant is way different than basically every other bolt-action rifle out there. You start looking at the markings and import marks. You start looking at the chamber and, you know, what it is that the rifle's actually chambered in. You start looking at the sights. You start looking at ABC, D, E, F, G, basically everything besides the wood that would indicate what it is that the rifle actually is. Now once you figure out what the rifle is and what it's chambered in, now comes the fun part. If you are unfamiliar with firearms, you got to learn basic firearm safety. So in a nutshell, firearm safety, don't load it until you are ready to actually, use said firearm. A lot of people will dispute that, saying that they have their defensive firearm, loaded at all times. That firearm is in use. If you're using it as a defensive firearm, that firearm is currently in use. You're not going to be, well, hopefully not. Hopefully you're not going to be using granddad's old bolt-action hunting rifle for, personal defense. But if you are, then hey, I recommend getting something a little bit more, modern age. But don't load it until you're ready to actually use it. Always keep it pointed in a safe direction. Don't, aim it at something that you don't fully intend to destroy, and keep your booger hook off the bang switch. Memorize yourself with the actual fundamental functionality of the firearm. Whether or not you can tell whether or not it's loaded, if there's a loaded chamber indicator, or whether or not it's cocked. Familiarize yourself with where the safety is at. Get into good handling practice. Keep your finger off the trigger, set it on the side of the receiver or the stock or whatever it is that, the firearm actually is. A lot of it is muscle memory. Like I catch myself doing this very often with things that aren't even guns, like whether or not they're ratchets, air guns. It's just one of those things that you kind of nail into your head, finger off the trigger. That is one of the most important rules, whether or not, well, no matter what else happens, finger off the trigger, the likelihood of having some sort of catastrophic event dramatically goes down. Just that is probably, if I had to pick one rule that everybody followed and they not necessarily ignored the other rules, but one rule that was the most important: finger off the trigger. Finger off the trigger. I tell people that all the time. Whenever they come out here, whenever I have guests out here at the gun range and we do a bunch of shooting, I always emphasize finger off the trigger. Because things happen, you turn around a little bit too quickly, somebody's somewhere where you didn't want them to be, you might accidentally flag them. Things happen. You aim the gun in a place that, shouldn't be aimed. There's people that are not professional firearms enthusiasts like perhaps you and I are. Things happen. Finger off the trigger, and the likelihood of that event turning into something or escalating, the likelihood of that event escalating is very minuscule. So after you get a handle of firearm safety and you figure out what gun it is that you actually have, the ammunition that it takes, and whether or not your firearm is in fact safe to, actually use, I recommend, if you have no experience with firearms whatsoever, you have a competent gunsmith check it out. Just to make sure there's no barrel obstructions or weak points in the receiver or, recalls on that particular firearm, just to 100% ensure that the firearm is in fact safe to use. I got 4 rounds and another 4 rounds. All right, I have a grand total of 8 rounds. After you figure out the fundamental safety rules of firearms, I recommend practicing on things that are not full-on firearms, like perhaps airsoft gun, Nerf gun, a banana. I don't know. I definitely recommend practicing muzzle and trigger discipline on things that are not actually, loaded firearms. And practice it before you get to the range and make a complete ass of yourself. And that takes us into the next step. Take your gun out and shoot it. If you inherit a rifle and you are wanting to learn more about it, that means that you are interested in the lifestyle that is owning a rifle, and that means that you're going to want to practice with a rifle. Just owning a rifle and learning about it is not enough. I always wholeheartedly recommend, why I loaded this left-handed I don't know, but I always wholeheartedly recommend that people go out and they run the rifle that they have. More often than not, I have people that tell me that they have this, that, or the other thing. I'm like, oh great, how's it shoot? They don't know, they never shot it. I actually have a buddy that's letting me borrow several firearms to make video content with. And most of the stuff he's letting me borrow, he's never shot. I recommend that you go out and you shoot some of this stuff, man. You have a range at your house, come on now. But, like I said, go out and pull the trigger. Whenever you are shooting these old military surplus guns or just any old gun in general, like I said, get it checked out, because things happen. These things have been through, several wars at this point. This rifle I'm shooting is damn near a century old. And if you are not competent or comfortable, if you're not comfortable with what the rifle's condition might be, then you definitely do not want to go pulling that trigger. The cartridge that most of your centerfire rifles are going to fire are going to be upwards of like 55,000 psi of an explosion going off right in front of your face. So you want to make sure that rifle is up to par and capable of handling those pressures. Now there's an old saying, they don't make them like they used to. And a lot of these old school, you know, whether or not they're military surplus or not, a lot of your older rifles are of a much, much higher quality and durability than your newer ones. So if you get yourself an older rifle, odds are it's going to be in some really, really, really stout metal. I'm not sure what that sentence was supposed to be. Odds are if you get yourself an older rifle, it's going to be quite durable. Unless there's something obviously wrong with it, then odds are there's going to be nothing wrong with it. But like I said, for disclaimer purposes, get it checked out by a competent gunsmith. Anytime I'm out here testing out a rifle that is not brand new, that I myself have not fired before, I will actually like hide behind the tree that the camera here is currently sitting on, and I will fire the rifle from behind a tree just in case it does detonate. This way I don't, you know, get lethally injured. Now this smaller, lighter weight rifle does take the same caliber ammunition as our much larger rifle right here. Like I said, they're basically fundamentally the same rifle. The wood on them is just a little bit different, and the barrel on this one is a little bit shorter. But as a result, since this one is considerably lighter, firing the same cartridge, the recoil on this one is quite a bit harsher than the recoil on that larger one. A lot of times your newer shooters will want like a smaller, more compact gun because they think the recoil is going to be less. No, that is not the case. The recoil is determined by the cartridge that the firearm fires. Like I had somebody out here who was a newer shooter and they wanted to shoot this over this right here because they thought that this would have less recoil despite the fact that they are chambered in the same cartridge. I had to explain to them that you have, well, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you are launching a, 200 grain projectile in that direction at X amount of speed, then you're going to have that same amount of force coming back onto your shoulder. If you have a heavier gun to absorb more of that force, then you're going to have lighter recoil than you would, say, a lighter gun firing the same exact bullet at the same exact velocities, or in this particular case a little bit less velocity because the barrel is a little bit shorter, but not enough of a change to really notice a significant difference. And the loss of weight in this gun, the recoil gained from that far exceeds what you would lose from the slightly lowered velocity in this thing. Trying to explain to someone that a lighter weight, smaller gun recoils more than a larger gun, if they don't know anything about ballistics and anything about, well, you guys, I'm not going to go on a whole tangent here. You guys see what I'm trying to say here. Trying to explain something like that to somebody who knows absolutely nothing about firearms is not necessarily a hassle, but it takes time, and I'm having to pretty constantly. As a matter of fact, I might just make a whole video on what determines recoil. Oh, and the shorter barrel on this thing attributes to a more concussive blast since all the gunpowder doesn't burn off all the way. Oh my goodness. I think out of all my rifles, this one's probably my favorite hunting rifle just because how lightweight it is, how powerful the rounds are, and the fact that it's, an aftermarket stock and a Chinese Type 53 Mosin Nagant, which is, a kind of Mosin Nagant that people don't really care about. I have no problems with this thing getting wet, dinged up. I mean, it's the perfect hunting gun. It's a Sporterized Type 53. It is phenomenal. I threw a recoil absorption pad on the back, and my God, this thing makes all the difference in the world. This used to be not a fun gun to shoot, but now it's actually quite pleasurable. Oh no. I mean, I wouldn't be out here shooting, a whole spam can of 440 rounds from this thing, but I could shoot it for a hunting trip. And it is exceptionally light. Like anyone who's ever dealt with a Mosin's trigger knows that it's basically like dragging a grand piano over a gravel road. But this thing is just, oh God, it just snaps forward. It does not take a lot of force at all. There's just a little bit of take up, and then, man, it just pops forward. This is an incredibly accurate rifle, and the bore on this thing, I'm taking out the bolt now. Rifle is empty and unchambered. The bore on this thing is absolutely immaculate. Like, I'd say it's probably 95% left. This rifle, before it got into my hands, was clearly very not used. So as you can see from the little spiel that I went on talking about this rifle and my enthusiasm behind it, you should get enthusiastic about the rifle that you've inherited or that you've been given or that you've, you know, however it is that you got your hands on this rifle after you've learned what it is, after you've taken it to the range a couple of times. You know, learn to get good at it, learn to get better at it. A lot of people will tell you all sorts of tricks, tidbits, and whatnot about shooting your rifles. Just making sure my 9130 there is clear. A lot of tricks and tidbits about shooting your rifles, but I'd say the most important one is, you know, learning how to line up whatever sights it is that you have, or learning how to aim down your reticule or scope or whatever it is that is on your rifle. And after you have your sights lined up, you just pull that trigger until it goes off, and you want to make sure the gun does not move. Just by doing that, you can increase your accuracy dramatically. Now, I am not the most accurate shot, but a lot of that has to do with my eyesight. It's just one of the downsides of being a blind guy. But even though I'm not a great shot, I'm still wholeheartedly enthusiastic about the firearms that I use on a pretty normal basis. And I hope that whatever it is that you guys have come across, you get enthusiastic about it as well. Unless, of course, you are one of the people who watch me on a regular basis and, you know, you own several of the same firearm because you're so enthusiastic about it. I'm the same way. Odds are, if you're watching this video, you are a firearms enthusiast already. But many times I am asked by people who are not firearms enthusiasts. So now I have a video that I can send to those people, and hopefully they learn a thing or two, and hopefully they gain some enthusiasm for what it is that they're trying to do. Now, for the most part, most of your mainstream military surplus rifles, I already have videos on. But there's just so many different variations of military surplus rifles out there, and a whole plethora of hunting rifles out there that I haven't even began to touch the tip of the iceberg on. I get all sorts of people that ask me, you know, what about this? What about that? What's my opinion on this, that, this, that, this, that? And I don't think that I could ever fully make videos on everything that people are asking me about. I just don't have the budget to be able to get all these guns and bring them out to the range to, you know, get an opinion on them. So, yeah, at this point in time, I'm 25 years old, and my experience with the plethora of firearms that I am repeatedly asked about is very limited as to what it is that I and those I know own. So I might know about something out there, but for the most part, the likelihood of me using some obscure caliber that was developed in the 1960s and only lasted like 4 or 5 years, the odds of me knowing about those are very minuscule, or having any experience with those are very minuscule. And here I go off on another tangent. If you guys have anything to add for any of the new upcomers that maybe got their hands on a rifle that they didn't necessarily buy and don't know anything about, then put it down in the comments down below. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Check the comments down below. Odds are you're going to find some very useful information that perhaps I did not cover in this video. If you like this kind of stuff, subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do me a favor and actually like the video. That helps out with YouTube's algorithm. Description down below has a link to all sorts of stuff, including an email sign-up list. That being said, I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go grab me like a tall glass of ice water. It's warm out here in Florida today, so gotta stay hydrated. And then I'm gonna blow something else up. I'm having fun making my videos. Thanks for watching, guys. You guys go all have yourself a fantastic day. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.